Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Serious, what is the creepiest thing you have experienced that you cannot rationalize/explain? Episode 1. I like to think I am a rational person. I do not really believe in ghosts and whatnot, but your comment made me remember something from when I used to take care of my niece and nephew when they were little, age 4 and 5 at the time. My sister's house was in the middle of nowhere. An old, creepy farmhouse at the end of a long private road, surrounded in every direction by woods and fields. There was nobody around us at all. Super creepy place at night. It was evening and I was taking turns giving the kids their baths and dressed for bed. My 4-year-old nephew was watching TV in the living room on the opposite end of the house from where I was in my sister's room getting my 5-year-old niece dressed for bed. As I was getting her in her PJs, she is staring out the window into the dark backyard completely fixated on something with a concerned look. I asked her what she is looking at out there, and she says, "Those kids on our trampoline." Obviously, I look and see nobody out there at all. Now you are thinking she is just being imaginative or playing joke on me, but it is worth mentioning my niece was born with some mental disabilities that really limited her ability to be creative or imaginative when she was little. She was always very sincere and very literal. The concept of make-believe just was not something she grasped well. So, it seemed unusual to me that she would make something like that up, but that is what I chalked it up to. I am a little creeped out, but I am glad she is using her imagination, so I play along and ask what they look like and what they're doing. She says it's an older boy and a little girl, and they're running around playing on the swing set and trampoline. I say, "That's nice. Sounds like they are having fun," and I lead her back out to the living room to watch TV, while I grab her little brother to give him his bath and get dressed for bed. After his bath, I am getting my nephew dressed in my sister's room. He starts doing the exact same thing staring out the window, and he immediately asks, "Who are those kids on the trampoline?" Now I am creeped out. "What kids?" I ask. "The tall boy and little girl. They are playing on our trampoline. They shouldn't be playing on our trampoline." My nephew got really frustrated when I tried to insist nobody was outside. I was just like, "Okay, I'm done," and calmly noped out of there with my nephew. They were both so sincere about what they were seeing and were in separate rooms on opposite ends of the house when each one made their comments about what they saw outside. I really do not know what to make of it. That was not the only weird stuff that happened in that house either. I know there is a rational explanation for everything, but it still creeped me out. Way back in the day when building plastic airplane models were a thing, my brother saved up his allowance for a month to buy this certain kit. The day he brings it home, my mother and father tell us we must go to the grocery store, and we set off for the supermarket. On arrival back home, my brother races up to his room to start his model while the rest of us unpack the car. A few seconds later he come into the kitchen with a weird look on his face, not frightened but not okay either. He asks us, "Is this a joke?" We all have no idea what he is talking about and ask him what is going on. He repeats, "Is this some kind of joke?" almost yelling it at us. My mom now realizes he is serious and grabs him by the hand and asks what is wrong. My brother turns and says, "Very funny, guys. What did you do, buy another model and swap mine out for it?" My dad laughed and said, "No, what are you talking about?" My brother rushes upstairs to his room and flies back down, this time with a fully glued and painted model, the exact same one he purchased before. The box is shredded on his bedroom floor. My parents turn white, call the neighbors to see if anyone was seen on the property and start checking the rest of the house. Nothing else was touched, no doors were unlocked, all windows sealed. This was not the only odd thing that would happen there, but I remember it vividly because of my parents' reaction. There is no humanly viable way that model was built, glued, and painted in the time we were gone from the house. I would assume a prank by my dad who has that kind of humor, but it was the only time I have ever seen him seem scared. He has never admitted to it in 30+ years. When I was in high school we used to play this stupid game, we called Michael Myers. It was just hide and seek but in the dark. You had to play at night with no lights on and the curtains drawn, no sounds playing, and Michael Myers had to wait in the basement for a few minutes while everyone hid. One night we decide to play while my mom is out working. It was my brother, a few of my cousins, my friend, and my little sister was 6 or so at the time. After a few rounds I am found first and must be Michael. I do not like being the seeker alone, so I ask if my friend can do it with me. Everyone was fine with it, so we go and sit in the basement and wait. It is important during this part that you remain silent so you can hear where people are running to give you an advantage. After the 5-minute wait time we left the basement and stood in the office for a minute to let our eyes adjust to the dark. We left the office after searching briefly and went into the dining room. From the dining room you could see into the kitchen in the left and the living room on the right. We were sure we heard everyone run upstairs, so we started heading to the living room when my friend said my sister was hiding on top of the fridge. I look over and she was peering through the doorway from on top of the fridge. You could see her hair hanging and she was small. I assumed my brother put her up there as a joke because she could not get up there herself. I told my friend that we would just ignore her because she could not be seeker anyway. So, we went upstairs to find everyone else. We found my cousins first. My brother was particularly good at this game and since we knew where my sister was, we just gave up searching and yelled that he could come out from hiding. We switch on some lights, and he came out of hiding with my sister. My friend immediately started freaking out and asked my brother if she had been with him the whole time because we saw her on top of the fridge. My brother ran downstairs turning the lights on as he went but there was no one down there. He checked everywhere in the house. No one. I really felt like he had to have been messing with us, but we would have heard someone moving around. The house was seriously dead quiet. I have tried to figure out everything it could have been beside my sister, but I just do not know what it was. It is not a great memory and still gives me goosebumps. I never played the game again and was never comfortable in that house after that. When I was about 10, I was spending time together with my younger brother, 8 at the time, and our neighbor, also 8M, in our house on a normal Saturday afternoon. It was starting to get dark outside, and we had the brilliant thought to break out the new Ouija board my brother had gotten as a present recently. We went upstairs to my brother's room, turned off the lights and drew the curtains, and unboxed the Ouija board which was glow-in-the-dark. Growing up, my brother had 3 small paintings hung on his wall which were depictions of winter, summer, and fall, had been hung solidly for at least 6 years when this story takes place. This is important later. We started messing around with the Ouija board, with one of us kids obviously pulling on one end of the planchette to manipulate answers. Eventually, we asked, "Are there any spirits here?" and the planchette moved to yes, with no obvious manipulation from any of the 3 of us. This was spooky, so we asked, "Do you want us to stop?" and the planchette moved to yes again. Immediately after this, the painting on the far left inexplicably falls bizarre and the glass on it cracks. We freak out, turn on the lights, my mom comes upstairs and reassures us that it is fine, there are no malevolent ghosts, just a coincidence, whatever. We calm down, my mom leaves to continue making dinner, and we shrug and turn the lights back off to continue playing with the Ouija board. We keep asking it questions and getting nonsense answers until we ask, "Are you angry?" The planchette moves to yes, with no pulling from anyone, right as the painting right next to the one that just feel bizarre also inexplicably falls to the ground, this time shattering the glass. This made us fully freak out. Mom comes upstairs and puts the Ouija board away, and I have never played with one since. Our house was old but there was no other paranormal kind of activity, nor do I really believe in ghosts or anything, but this experience was just too strange and creepy to explain. The paintings continued to hang simply fine for years after that. When I was younger, around 7 or 8, my mother, brother, and I were living in an incredibly old flat in a city a few hours from London. It is an old place and there are slave trade memorials all over the city, especially close to where we lived. I used to have terrible night terrors, so my mum moved me into her bedroom. I remember it very clearly. It was a large room, and her bed was to the right of me, while my bed was vertical and facing the bedroom door. It was small, smaller than a regular single, and had metal railings all around it, no clue because but I remember it always made me feel safe. I do not know how soon after I moved into my mum's room it started, but someone began visiting me. I say someone because this did not appear to be an entity or otherworldly creature, it looked like a man. Every night, I would lie awake clutching the covers desperately and waiting for him so I could scream. Do not ask me why I did not scream first. In my child brain I was afraid if I screamed before I saw him, he would be mad. Every night I would hear boom. Boom. Boom, which was the sound of his boots on the stairs. He walked very slowly so there was always about a 2-second gap between each step. Does not sound long but consider how quickly you walk up the stairs. The boom of his boots would continue until he reached top, where he would slowly turn into my room. His boots would suddenly not make any noise, as if he were not even touching the floor. He was gray and faded, like a watercolor. He wore a straw hat that he had tipped over his eyes, so the top of his face was hidden, plus his head was always slightly bent forward as if he was looking at the floor. He wore dungarees and a shirt underneath that appeared tattered, and in his mouth was some kind of piece of hay or long grass or something, which he chewed as he walked. He would make his way slowly to my bed, not looking up or changing pace, and the scariest part was I never could tell if he knew I was there or not. I could not tell if he was just coming in my room because he wanted to be in that room or was there for me. Either way it was terrifying. I mention I had night terrors before, because when I first saw him, I thought he was a night terror. But then I started staying awake, and I waited for him because I was too scared to fall asleep and wake up with him stood over me. I know he was real. I felt him, I felt the presence of another person, I heard him, and I saw him. I would blink and then look, blink, and look and he would still be there walking. Before he could get too close, I would scream, my mother would wake up, and I would tell her he had come. Eventually she went to my granddad, her dad, for help. She was genuinely scared and did not know what to do. I was scared in the day and scared at night. I was a wreck. She is not a religious person per se, but she is highly spiritual. They believed he was a slave. I do not know exactly what they did, but I was not allowed in that room for a couple of days. My mother had frankincense and some other herbs, and they spent time in the room speaking light and positive incantations. She asked whoever he was not to harm me, and to leave because I was afraid. After that he never came back. It was like he had never been there. I am 27 now. It is not exactly blood-curdling fear like it was back then, but every now and then if I am in a room and walk into a dark hallway, I shudder thinking about him, and where he really came from. Okay, this one is a repost, but I have been scratching my brain for ages for an explanation, and still cannot find any. I was looking for a birthday present for a friend. Her being a massive lover of dogs and me spending hours each week hunting down goodies and games at the local flea market, I figured a plushie of a dog would be perfect. My first hunt afterward at the market proved fruitful, and I soon was walking back home with a large and cute doggo plush that caught my eye. At the time, my best option to wash any big plushies was to leave them soaking water and laundry detergent in the family bathtub for a bit, coming back later and wringing/washing the hell out of them, before hanging them. A few hours and a heavy/wet doggo later, I started washing it for real. As soon as I started, I hear a little metallic scraping sound and I get annoyed, fearing that I did not notice a voice box in the doggo and destroyed it. I squish it for a bit trying to find where the box could be before giving up and returning to wringing. To only notice it was dripping something else rather than water. Blood. I start examining my hands wondering if I did not wound myself. Nothing. I grab the dog and wring it for a bit, confirming that it was the actual bleeder. 21 years old me start panicking and leaves the bathroom. I manage to calm down and come back to the doggo with a pair of scissors, before starting to open the stitches at its side and opening it. Taking out the wool slowly, I noticed there was a black thrash bag inside the dog. I quickly extract it and open it. A now destroyed by water/washing bag of razor blades, a B+ small blood bag. And a bag of white powder. The razors managed to pierce the blood bag while I was washing, causing the bleeding. But now I started panicking. This is Tunisia in 2010. Having a picture of drugs on your phone can send you 10 years behind bars. Cue me grabbing multiple black trash bags and put the guy in them, spill an entire bottle of bleach in the bathtub, yes, bad idea, and quickly throw the wrapped doggo in the public trash. Result, a bleach-smelling bathtub for a week, a bleach-burned hand and thrashed for me for double that time, and a still lingering question: I can get the drug and razors, but why the blood bag? And why in a dog plush? Teller, Bleeding Demon Doggo plush turned out to have a blood bag and drugs inside it, scaring me even worse. I live in an apartment with an area people leave free things to take. I was going through a bad patch, and I decided to force myself to at least walk down the stairs and get the mail, just for the exercise. I came down and I saw this painting someone had left. The best way to describe it is if someone drew a dog as a human on a yellow background with big anime eyes. I do not know why, but it made me feel slightly better, so I took it up to my apartment. For the next few days, I felt like I was going insane. Like there was a voice in my head screaming all the time asking me to save it. It seemed terrified. One day I had an intense nightmare, and my mom woke me up and I saw her eyes look like the painting, but I honestly did not connect the two until my friend reminded me about the painting. I kept forgetting I had that painting for some reason. Eventually I put it back downstairs, but even that was difficult. It felt wrong, and I just felt like something was screaming into my head, terrified, the entire time. The second I put it back and went upstairs, everything went back to normal. It was gone from the area the next day, but it would come back every few days and disappear like people were taking the painting and leaving it again. Then it just disappeared. I showed people pictures of that painting, and no one understands why I wanted it. I do not even understand. It just seemed nice. Both stories are water-related, but widely different. I spent most of my school years in the swimming teams of wherever I studied. I was not keen on competitions, mostly because I just liked the hard swimming. I was a troubled kid, and I liked the strange quietness of the water. So, one day, after class, I decided I wanted to swim for a bit, just to chill after a long day of consecutive tests. The swimming pool was in a gym building, apart from the rest of the school and empty in those off-class hours. When I enter, it was completely deserted. Only the lights were on. Not even the lifeguard was present. Thinking back, that is a hazard. I quickly go to the locker room to get changed into my swimming gear, and just like that, I am in the water, doing laps over and over. I picked the middle lane of the pool because it was my favorite, and if one of the older bully kids decided to move around with the heating system, which happened often, I would not get blasted with a stream of cold water mid-swimming session. As I was about to take a breath by turning my head to the left, I see a man swimming on the lane right beside me. Not an older kid or anything, an actual adult. He looked incredibly pale, but it could have been just the water and the pool's lights with my eyesight. But I immediately noticed something weird. I did not hear that guy jump in the pool, nor did I hear him swimming. Except for the sound of my own swimming, it was dead quiet. I thought that I was just too distracted and did not notice, so I kept swimming. I take my breath, and when I look again, the guy's gone. I looked around in the pool as I got closer and closer to the end of that lap, and there was nobody. As soon as I got to the edge, I got out of the pool and checked if someone was around. Nobody. The floor everywhere was also dry, so nobody but me entered or left the pool. I felt really creeped out, so I changed back into my school uniform and got out of the pool as fast as I could. My friends laugh at the story, but when I told the coach about it, he acted weird, like he knew something, but never spoke of it again. The other one happened at sea. I was 17 at the time and traveled to Cabo Frio, in Rio de Janeiro, I am Brazilian, with a few friends to catch some waves. At the time, I was really into bodyboarding, as were my friends. We spent 5 days there and every single day was spent on the beach. On our last day, a swell came up and we caught some big ones. The beach we were in had some sandbanks far into the water, where the bigger waves usually showed up. Logically, we were there. Problem was that everything after that sandbank was open sea. The beach we were bodyboarding at had a sideways current, so we never had to worry about being pulled far into the ocean if we did not go too far in. But, as I said, it was a swell day. The current was getting strong, and people were leaving the water because the waves were getting scary, and the sun was setting. Being the stupid and overconfident teens we did not take the hint to leave. It did not help that the sideways current took us far from where most people were. Eventually, we were just waiting for a final bunch of waves, so we could leave the water and take the bus back home. Except the waves never came. The current got strong out of nowhere and all 3 of us were being violently dragged into the open sea. We were terrified. The sun was about to set and there we were, getting closer and closer to not being rescued. And then, something pushed us. Not like a current, but something. I could feel this weird texture, like kelp and scales pushing my legs and my feet forwards, and my friend Luis screamed that he felt like someone was pulling his board towards the coast. Whatever it was strong, because in no time, we were at the sand bank and immediately, there was a huge wave, which we rode till we reached the sand. When we came out of the water, we were all shaking, terrified of what could have just happened. Whatever it was that threw us towards a wave, we were very thankful. Nobody talked much when we walked back to the bus station. Whenever me and these 2 friends meet, we mention this story and laugh it off, but I always wonder what happened. I am a pretty skeptic guy and not at all religious, but I really cannot explain what happened to me in these 2 occasions. I have a few other stories if anyone wants to hear. Since people asked, I have another one. For context, I am an atheist and do not really believe in ghosts or demons, but the stories I told before and the one I am about to tell still get me deeply confused. I was about 6 or 7 years old and my family, my dad, mom, and me, just moved to another city, where I still live. My father was in the Air Force, so we moved a lot. We lived in the local Air Force Base barracks for a few weeks until we finally found an apartment that had enough room for us. Shortly after moving in, I had these constant nightmares. Nothing out of the ordinary, since I was a kid that lived in a different state, where people sounded quite different, and the kids were not as friendly and made fun of my accent. I did not know where anything was and had no friends, so I imagine I was stressed at that time. But in one night, I felt uneasy before sleeping. It was strange, like every shadow was a bit darker and my room felt weird. I was never afraid of the dark, but I tried sleeping with the light on that night. But my dad came in, switched off the light, and when I asked him to leave it on, he just told me to suck it up and sleep. Wonderful way to talk to a kid, huh? It took a while, but eventually I fell asleep. I had this horribly vivid nightmare of being in this dark room. Looked like mine, but everything was misplaced. The walls seemed moldy and scratched and there was glass all over the floor. I could not move. And then I noticed a tall and shadowy figure standing in the corner. It gets shivers just remembering this. It looked like someone wearing a hood. There were no distinguishable features but the eyes, that kind gave off this weird glimmer like a cat's eyes in the dark. It just stood there for the longest time, just eyeing me. Its eyes darted all around me, like it was evaluating what I was. Then, it lifted its arm, like it was trying to reach out to me, but looked like it struggled. In the nightmare, it kept saying, "Come to me, I can't reach you if you stay so far away," angrier and angrier. The angrier it got, the bigger it got, and it felt like I was slowly gliding towards it against my will. I started screaming when its hand started getting closer to me, and eventually my mom came into my room. Here is where it gets creepy, though. She tells me that just before she turned on the light in my room, she could see a shadowy figure standing beside my bed, about to touch my face. She told me that it looked at her and vanished into thin air as soon as she flicked the light on. I was pretty shaken up and cried non-stop. My mom was rattled too, and she comforted me. We sat on my bed and kept talking to each and watched sunrise. It never happened again, and Mom hates talking about that night. I get spooked whenever I remember it, especially because this memory is clear in my head. When I was growing up, my family lived in a small 2-bedroom trailer. My older sister and I had one room while my parents shared the other. My mom was convinced that it was haunted. From her bed she could see an old reclining chair in the living room. Some nights she would suddenly wake up and see an old man sitting in it, staring out the window. She would always wake my dad up and send him to go investigate. He would stomp in the room and turn the empty chair around. This happened quite a bit. My sister also used to claim to see an old man standing in her closet. She was young enough that she does not remember much, so I do not have any more story there. Mom also swore that some days she would hear giggling and see a little blonde girl running down the hallway. At first, she would always assume it was me and go to investigate, only to find the house empty. We moved out of that trailer after a few years. I did not know anything about this until years later when I was in college. One of my childhood friends and I were spending time together at my parents' place when a paranormal show came on. My dad made a joke about the wife in the show always sending her husband to investigate noises in the middle of the night before following it up with, "Who does that sound like?" After some prodding, I got my mom to tell the story. She sticks by her story and believes to this day that, while the girl's spirit was friendly, the old man seemed malicious. If the story stopped there, I would say it could just be my mom having an overactive imagination. However, my friend seemed freaked out by the story. She asked my parents where the trailer was. We lived in a small village, so it was not hard to pinpoint, and it turns out that one of her brother's best friends bought the trailer from the older couple that my parents had sold the place to. The whole family swore the place was haunted. They always talked about how a spirit of an old man would sit in a chair in the living room and stare out the window. The trailer passed through a number of different hands before burning down a few years ago. I have a few other weird stories, but this one is by far the hardest for me to explain.
Many years ago, when I was a teenager, I went to a secluded beach with some friends. We had been spending time together at the water, picking shells and such like for most of the evening, and when it started to get very dark, we decided to head back. We had walked quite a way down the beach, and we could not see very well where the path back up to the road was, so I said I had run up onto the sand dunes and look around to see where we were. When I got to the top, I could see the path was not too far away from where we were, so I made my way back down to let the gang know. I could see them sitting on a sand dune a few feet ahead of me, facing the sea, and I called out to them, but they did not turn around. So, I made my way down through the dunes until I was right beside them and said, "Hey." The person turned around, and it was not my friends, but a middle-aged woman who was just looking at me with an expressionless stare. I apologized for nearly landing in on top of her, and then when I glanced over at the two people beside her, I realized that it was not two people, but big tufts of grass that my eyes had mistaken for the outline of people in the dim light. When I looked back to the woman, she was still looking at me with that same blank expression. I started to move away from her, and as I did, her face started to dissolve away into the sand. My heart nearly stopped there and I nearly tumbled down the rest of the way through the sand dunes. My friends had been standing just a few feet away. It was just my brain playing tricks on me in the half-light, but I saw her face so clearly. It has been over 20 years, and I think if I saw her again, I would recognize her.
Many years ago, when I was a teenager, I went to a secluded beach with some friends. We had been spending time together at the water, picking shells and such like for most of the evening, and when it started to get very dark, we decided to head back. We had walked quite a way down the beach, and we could not see very well where the path back up to the road was, so I said I had run up onto the sand dunes and look around to see where we were. When I got to the top, I could see the path was not too far away from where we were, so I made my way back down to let the gang know. I could see them sitting on a sand dune a few feet ahead of me, facing the sea, and I called out to them, but they did not turn around. So, I made my way down through the dunes until I was right beside them and said, "Hey." The person turned around and it was not my friends, but a middle-aged woman, who was just looking at me with an expressionless stare. I apologized for nearly landing in on top of her, and then when I glanced over at the two people beside her, I realized that it was not two people, but big tufts of grass that my eyes had mistaken for the outline of people in the dim light. When I looked back to the woman, she was still looking at me with that same blank expression. I started to move away from her, and as I did, her face started to dissolve away into the sand. My heart nearly stopped there and then, and I nearly tumbled down the rest of the way through the sand dunes. My friends had been standing just a few feet away. It was just my brain playing tricks on me in the half-light, but I saw her face so clearly. It has been over 20 years, and I think if I saw her again, would recognize her.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.